Estimados estudiantes, profesores, empresarios, emprendedores, colaboradores, distribuidores e invitados especiales de McGraw Hill, muchas gracias por acompañarnos a este gran evento. En McGraw Hill estamos muy emocionados por contar con la presencia de Ekaterina Walter y Jessica Gioglio, autoras del libro Las leyes de la marca, el storytelling. A continuación, les voy a compartir una breve semblanza de las autoras. Ekaterina Walter es innovadora de negocios y campañas de mercadotecnia, oradora internacional y autora del éxito del Wall Street Journal, Think Like Zuck, en referencia a Mark Zuckerberg, fundador de Facebook, y coautora de la obra The Power of Visual Storytelling. Después de ser precursora de las redes sociales y en estrategias digitales para marcas de Fortune 500 como Intel y Accenture, cofundó una nueva empresa que fue adquirida por Sprinklr, una plataforma que gestiona la experiencia de clientes, donde se desempeñó como embajadora global. Ahora ayuda a organizaciones mundiales a crear estrategias de transformación digital centradas en el cliente. El liderazgo intelectual de Ekaterina ha aparecido en importantes medios de comunicación como CNBC, ABC, NBC, Fox News, Forbes, Fast Company, TechCrunch, CNN, and Huffington Post, entre otras. El sector y sus colegas la reconocen constantemente por su pensamiento innovador. Fue la número 3 en talento de marketing social de las 40 principales del mundo de Forbes, y la revista Fortune le incluyó en la lista de personas de negocios más influyentes en las redes sociales. Cuando Ekaterina no escribe sobre innovación digital y empresarial, ella y su pequeña hija son coautoras de libros infantiles. El primero de una serie planeada, Amber and Sapphire, The Magic Spell, se publicó en 2017. Ekaterina Walter tiene una maestría en gestión internacional de la Thunderbird School of Global Management de la Universidad del Estado de Arizona. Por su parte, Jessica Gioglio es una reconocida estrategia de negocios sociales y digitales y coautora del libro The Power of Visual Storytelling. Pasó más de una década dirigiendo programas de marketing transformativo, relaciones públicas y de redes sociales para las mejores empresas de su clase como Dunkin' Donuts, TripAdvisor, State Street, Comcast y Sprinklr. Desde asesorar a grandes empresas en redes sociales y transformación comercial digital, hasta dirigir un galardonado programa de redes sociales y relaciones públicas para Dunkin' Donuts, o proporcionar programas de comunicación para TripAdvisor. Jessica contribuye ofreciendo innovación centrada en el cliente y aceleración del crecimiento. Reconocida líder de opinión y oradora, Jessica fue nombrada una de las principales líderes en marketing a seguir por LinkedIn, HubSpot, Top Rank Online Marketing y We Are the City de Reino Unido. El liderazgo intelectual y comentarios sobre el sector de Jessica han aparecido en importantes medios como CNBC, USA Today, PR Week, Computer World, Chief Marketer, entre otros. Jessica tiene una licenciatura en marketing por la Universidad de Bentley con una especialización en relaciones públicas. En su tiempo libre, Jessica explora el mundo y escribe sobre sus aventuras en su blog de estilo de vida. Bienvenidas, es un gusto tenerlas aquí con el público de Latinoamérica. Antes de iniciar el evento, les quiero mencionar que contamos con el servicio de traducción simultánea al español. En el botón que se encuentra en la parte inferior de la pantalla, dice Interpretation. So, in order to start the webinar, Ekaterina, Jessica, I only would like to say that it's a great honor to be with you and to have the opportunity to listen to your tips, lessons, the adequate content that we have to consider in our stories, where we can find amazing stories, moments that inspire people, and how to turn simple conversations into great stories. So go ahead. Thank you very much. Bravo.
Hello, everybody. Thank you. Jess and I are happy to be here.
Yes. I was just going to say thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Hans. We will jump right in. Just let me.
As Jessica is pulling this up, what we're going to do today is we'll just tell you a little bit about us and our story and why we're so passionate about writing the book. We'll tell you a little bit about what's in the book, and then we'll share 5 main tips today with you on how to build your brand and company with storytelling. We'll use some of the examples around those tips, and we welcome your questions, right, Jess? We'll love a conversation. We'll have time for Q&A. So Jessica and I are very excited about having that conversation with you after the presentation.
Yes, we really encourage you to write down your questions and to type your questions into the comments as you think of them during the presentation, so we can have a good discussion afterwards. So as Ekaterina said, why don't we jump in? And we thought it's perfect for a presentation on storytelling to start with our story, because there are many people who write books together, but Ekaterina and I like to think that we have a very special story. And we actually met through speaking at the same conference together, actually in Chicago, back when I was at Dunkin' Donuts and she was at Intel. And we just immediately clicked. I don't know if you've ever met someone in your life that you just really bonded with. That's immediately what happened with the two of us. It was like sparks flying, but for friendship. And fast forward a few months, and we realized that we were both invited to speak at the same conference in Paris. It is actually an event that no longer runs, called Le Web. And I immediately emailed Ekaterina to say, are you going? Where are you staying? And it turned into us sharing a hotel room together for an entire week in Paris. And although we had already kind of, met one another and become friends, this is truly, I think, where our friendship kind of went to the next level. And we started to really kind of geek out over marketing, storytelling. And we realized we shared so many similar viewpoints and passions about the topic of storytelling. And no joke, 9 months after we shared a hotel room in Paris, our first book was born. So I guess it was kind of a romantic rendezvous in Paris. But we're just talking about a book here. And that's really our story. We loved working on our first book, The Power of Visual Storytelling, together. And that book really focuses on how you can use visuals on different social media channels to shape a cohesive story around your brand. And because that book was so popular, we started to get a lot of requests to drive deeper into the topic of storytelling, and specifically how to craft a great story. So inspired kind of by that feedback, people wanted us to go beyond just the visuals and really talk about the art and the science and the magic of storytelling. This is how our second book, The Laws of Brand Storytelling, came to life. Is there anything else you want to share about our story, Ekaterina?
Well, just the fact that we're super passionate about the topic. So, pin us on social media after the webinar if you don't have your question answered or you would like to connect and talk. We are very engaged with communities around the world, and we love the topic. So if you want to connect, we would welcome that. And with that, Jess, I guess we can kick it off. Yeah.
Yes, and you will see our contact details on every slide in this presentation, so you have plenty of time to grab them all. Great. So We thought it would be a good idea to start with a definition of brand storytelling. What is brand storytelling? And how we define brand storytelling in our book is that brand storytelling is the art of shaping a company's identity through the use of narratives and storytelling techniques that facilitate an emotional response and establish meaningful connections. Now, Ekaterina, I'm going to transfer it over to you for the next slide.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jessica. I also want to add that Jessica and I are firm believers in the fact that a brand is the sum of interactions, whether it's real or perceived by your customers, that a person has with the company across all touch points. So I want you to understand that we are not just talking here about content marketing per se or content strategy. We're talking about everything that encompasses that customer experience that you have across all touch points. So we believe that your brand identity isn't fixed, it's fluid. If you stay true to who you are and your mission in everything you do, you have a chance to build on it consistently with your everyday stories and strengthen your brand in that process. Because in the age of empowered consumer, remember that your brand is not what you say it is, it's what they say it is. And so the way we structured the book is around different laws, but we have 6 main sections. And those sections include a variety of information. So for example, we start with Protagonist Law, and that law helps you define, or those laws within that chapter help you define who you are and how you want to present your brand to the world. So it could be your purpose, your visual identity, your key differentiators, and more. Now we help you craft your authenticity playbook. It is the concept and framework that Jessica and I developed to help you dig deeper than just your founding story. Because it's easy to just say, hey, here's why and how our company got created, but dig deeper. It helps you find pathways to build trust and respect with your current and prospective customer base by focusing on, as an example, on issues your company stand for across all lines of your business, from how you source your products and how you treat your employees and customers to potentially big issues like key economic and environmental issues, because customers becoming more and more aware and engaged in those conversations. The next part is the strategy laws, and those laws help you understand your true goals and help you craft a strategy that's right for you. So we offer an actual strategic blueprint that you can use to create your strategy and storytelling approach. Discovery laws help you find your story. So not just your founding story, but digging deeper into micro stories that would best present your brand's spirit. And I'll talk a little bit more about micro and macro and micro stories later. But great stories are different from traditional brand messages. They don't include, product benefits and pricing offers. They are beautifully messy and authentic, and they are emotional. And they hold us spellbound, and they make us think. And that's what really engages consumers. You can find hundreds of beautiful stories around your brand if you know where to look. And we'll give you some real great tip sheet that gives you some fantastic ideas. Now, the story making laws help you craft your story. This is our heaviest chapter, and it has 12 laws, and that is for good reason. I mean, there are a lot of important elements to consider when crafting your story, and we'll walk you through what you need to remember in crafting your omni-channel content strategy, your content mix, and your content calendar. Now, the channel laws focus on sharing your story across the many channels available today. Now, both digital online and offline, which is also important, and we'll show you an example of that. Now, while the right visual or narrative may bring your story to life, it is the channel that gives your stories a real home. And here's the exciting thing. Each channel brings something different to the table. So the rules and best practices of that should be a part of your overall approach. Now, the laws of engagement help you engage with your communities, because let's face it, engagement is the heart of marketing, right? That's what it is nowadays. The best strategy and the most compelling content can fade into nothingness without meaningful social interaction. Happened before, right? Communities are the pulse of your brand, and engagement is your lifeblood. That is very important to remember, because after creating all that content, if you don't have engagement with your communities, it'll only go so far. So to provide the best customer experience, you have to be present, listen, communicate, engage. And there's one more law that we included at the end of the book, but it's a surprise one. Jessica and I will let you discover it for yourselves when you pick up the book.
I love that, Ekaterina. Such a great teaser there. And I think I will just add, I think it's really nice that we framed the book into laws, but I will just add that there's so many great strategic frameworks that really help take you on a step-by-step journey to learn about storytelling and learn how to apply storytelling to kind of your job and to your company, which I think we've gotten a lot of feedback on just how helpful the book is, both with the frameworks and with the inspiring examples throughout. And we have tried to put a number of international examples in there as well. As a result of the work we get to do around the world, it's been fun to hear great stories from folks around the world. So we also encourage you, if you start to apply, some of these principles and start coming up with great brand stories, you definitely have to send them to us, because who knows, you might end up in a feature book, so or an article or something like that. We love hearing inspiring examples of storytelling. So
yeah, so Jess, let's transition into the 5 tips we have to offer on how to become a better storyteller. So I'll let you take it away.
Yes, I will jump right in. So we today have 5 tips on how to become a better storyteller. And the first tip, I'm sorry if this looks a little, we have kind of the screens kind of going over it. But the first tip is that telling great stories comes from knowing who you are. So Ekaterina just spoke to you about the protagonist laws, and we're going to summarize a few of kind of the key takeaways from that section of the book. Now, some questions that you want to ask yourself as you're trying to kind of shape your storytelling strategy is, who are you as a brand? What is your mission? What is your why as a business? And what are your core values? As Ekaterina said earlier, it's very easy to default to the About Us section on your website, but really, to be a great storyteller, you have to think about the many different layers of your business. Now, that comes into how your brand is defined, what your mission is. So, for example, some companies really have a strong mission, like Tom's Shoes, for example. They're very much about giving back to people in need. For every pair of shoes you buy, they donate a pair of shoes to a child in need. So some companies really are kind of mission driven. And even if you're not a mission driven business, I guarantee that your company has specific things that they stand for. This could be politically, this could be about kind of being a more environmentally friendly and sustainable. there's so many exciting missions that really define really who you are and the types of stories that you can tell. And another key point is about your why as a business. Now, every company is in business for a reason. Why is your company in business? Even if you're a freelancer, a graphic designer, you're kind of, you're a teacher, everyone has a why as to what they're doing kind of in their profession. And the same thing goes for companies. And the more that you can define that, the more great stories are going to unfold that shape around that why. And then last but certainly not least, we also talk about what are your core values. So I mentioned a little bit about this, about perhaps companies have values around sustainability or specific political topics, but really layering into kind of what you stand for as a business, but also the values that you run your organization by. So this can be policies you have for your employees. For example, how you treat your employees. I think we've all seen in the past year, a lot of programs with companies have changed. A lot of us are working remotely. Companies are now kind of changing if we work from offices or we work from home. There's a lot of interesting stories that are unfolding around kind of some of these corporate culture and company values. So it might even be around values on how you want employees to treat one another, how you treat your customers. There's a lot of space there that really helps define who you are as a business and also the types of stories you can tell. Now, Ekaterina, do you have anything that you'd like to add to this?
No, this is perfect. I love your next upcoming example. Let's talk about that.
Okay, yeah, let's jump into an example. So it's easy for us to talk about this and say, here are some great things that you want to do as you define who you are. Let's show an example of a company that really has a strong sense of who they are and what they stand for. And the company that's shown on screen here is GE, or General Electric is the longer name. And GE's purpose as a company is around innovation in STEM. Now, you might be wondering, what does STEM stand for? I'm so happy you asked. It stands for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So all of the things that I'm actually probably not very good at, if I'm honest. I'm definitely more of a creative soul. But what's great is that GE actually does their content and their storytelling, where someone like me who's really not, very proficient in some of these topics, understands what the company does, understands what they stand for, and they also are able to then start taking it more technical for those who actually are in those subject matter areas of expertise. So 2 examples here on screen. The first example here is about an employee named Tyler who works for GE Healthcare. And during the pandemic, he actually volunteered in their Wisconsin factory in America to help build medical equipment like ventilators based on the critical demand. So they did a kind of day in the life video that Tyler filmed on his phone, talking about kind of the work he was doing and how excited he was to work for a company like GE that allowed him to volunteer his time during the pandemic to do this work. Now, another example comes from an employee named Clay, and Clay, describes himself as a travel photographer, an animal lover, but also an advanced manufacturing engineer at GE Power. And they do these great employee takeovers of their Facebook page, and employees will take you through a series of posts with a behind the scenes look at what an average day in their life is like at GE. And what's great is both this example and Tyler's example are firsthand employee storytelling. They're talking to you about special projects they're working on, a day in their life. And while these are individual stories, they all layer back into GE's purpose around innovation in STEM, which makes it incredibly powerful when it all comes together.
I love that, Jess. I remember when we were just starting, I was still at Intel, and social media was new, and people had reservations, and we started to play with behind the scenes content. We would post a picture of engineer's desk, right? One of the employees that might look a mess to everybody else, but to nerds, tech folks, that was something they could recognize. And I remember we were apprehensive. We didn't know how that content will do, and it exploded. People want you to open your doors a little bit and show that human element. And that's what we call an example of micro stories. So let's talk about that, Jess. Let's talk about.
Let's jump into it.
So here's the thing. There are two types of stories, the way we see it. Macro stories are the core of your organization's DNA, right? It's why you were founded. It's your company's story, the founding myth. Macro stories are the why and the reason for everything the company does. Now, micro stories, however, are the lifeblood of your probably everyday, always on storytelling strategy. It's the sort of snackable content that feeds the perception of what your brand is. They are the moments in time that allow you to keep your brand at the forefront of everyone's mind in a very relevant way. Now, the hero of a macro story is usually the founder of the company or the brand itself. However, the cool part here is that the hero of micro stories vary vastly. Why? Because once a company is created, there are a lot of people who make it work, who make it tick, who make it successful. So examples could be customers and their families, your employees, your partners, your franchisees or licensees, your stakeholders, influencers, volunteers, even your mascots. I mean, just knows firsthand in the brands she worked on how to effectively use mascots in a very fun way.
Yes, so Dunkin' has two mascots. Well, so Dunkin' brands. Now they've since been acquired by Yum Brands, so there's even more brands and mascots. But at the time when I was working for Dunkin' brands, it was Dunkin' Donuts and Baskin Robbins. And the Dunkin' coffee cup is called Cuppy. And appropriately, the Baskin Robbins ice cream cone mascot is called Coney. I don't know how well that translates into Spanish, so bear with us. But we turned the mascots into characters, and people loved seeing the firsthand storytelling from the mascots. And it was a really fun way to tell different stories about the brand.
Yeah, and what Jessica and I did here is, we know this is a very heavy slide, but just go ahead and take a screenshot, because when we build stories, we always come up against this moment of, oh, wait, where should I source them? What are the creative ways, locations, ideas to source your stories from? And so we wanted to give you a tip sheet that basically outlines some of the ideas of where to look for those stories. So go ahead, take a screenshot, get creative with your micro stories, and figure out fun ways to engage your customers and your prospects. Jess, anything to add here?
Well, what I would say too is I think this is a great area for Q&A, that if you see one of these here and you're like, well, how would you use this to translate it into a story? Flag it as a question to us, because you might say, well, how do you use a survey to generate a story? And I can tell you, back when I was at TripAdvisor, we would run surveys throughout the year about different travel topics. And based on the survey data, we actually could shape kind of travel stories around kind of those trends and those insights. And it's everything around, our travelers becoming more sustainable when they travel, to kind of where are the top destinations that they want to go to this summer, and even some kind of funny and slightly naughty ones as well, because sometimes you have to go there.
Yeah, no, that's true. So that's it for this tip. Let's go to tip 3, Jess.
Yeah, so it's over to me now. So our third tip is that you need to embrace different visuals to bring stories to life. Now, we mentioned we've written an entire book on visual storytelling, and for good reason. There are now more visuals than ever before that you can use to tell a story. So as kind of you're shaping your storytelling strategy, you're identifying your macro story and all these great different micro stories that you can tell, you have to also ask yourself, well, which is the right visual to help bring that story to life? Visuals are actually processed 60,000 times faster than text alone. And if you think about it, when you're scrolling through Facebook, it's really the visual that pulls you into the post. We're kind of stuck there when we're waiting in line, scrolling, and something catches our eye. It's usually the visual. So some examples of the visuals you can use include photos, videos, animated GIFs, a humorous meme to put an exclamation point on a story, a cinematograph. And for those that don't know what a cinematograph is, it's actually a hybrid of an image and a video. And basically what your designer will do is they will overlay a still image on top of a video, like an animated GIF, and they'll cut out just one part of the picture. So for example, if someone's pouring a drink into a glass, it would just look like the water is constantly gushing into the glass, but never fills it up. And it's quite a cool way to pull you into a focal point of a story that you're trying to illustrate a point on. So I did some work for alcohol brands, for example, and we used cinemagraphs a lot to illustrate alcohol pouring into a glass to spark people's thirst, as you would say. Also, infographics are a great way to use data to tell a story, especially in B2B businesses, but also B2C. The example you see here on screen comes from Bloomberg, and it's actually an infographic that shares the different commodity prices of a pie on Pi Day. So March 14th every year is Pi Day. A very geeky thing, right? 3.14 is the pi symbol. And Bloomberg decided to do something creative on that day in that year. These were the prices of each commodity. So quite an interesting way to tell a story visually through data. We also did this a lot at Dunkin' Donuts, where we would run an annual survey about coffee consumption trends in the workplace. This was way before the pandemic, mind you, but we actually would visualize the results in an infographic, and so many news outlets would run that infographic, and blogs and social media influencers would share it because it was an interesting story to share. And we also, as part of that survey, would see which professions need coffee the most, which also sparked a lot of debate. Which was quite fun. I think everyone thinks their profession needs coffee the most, basically.
Definitely.
was what we learned from that one on social media, which again, made for a lot of fun and for a lot of good debating. But last but not least, let's not forget Slideshare presentations. You could take a presentation much like the one you're seeing here, and for very inexpensive, AKA free, you could make a visual ebook. You could put it on Slideshare, which is then kind of shareable across all the different social media channels. And you have basically a nice ebook. I mean, also tools like Canva now are incredibly great for creating those kind of presentations as well, which then you can share a nice kind of story that builds about your brand as well, which I think is incredibly underrated, but a really great tactic to try for storytelling. So let's share a little bit of an example here that is related to the pandemic, but we thought was quite clever. So I don't know if you guys have REI across Latin America, but REI is an athletic apparel and kind of sportswear kind of company. They sell everything from tents to kayaks to kind of different clothing items. My father is personally a huge super fan. He got his hiking boots there and will not stop telling me about it, basically. But what's great about REI is when the pandemic hit, they immediately pivoted their visual storytelling on social media to reflect our new normal. So if you can see here on the most left image, you see a gentleman cycling in a room in his house, reaching for that can of beer, his cerveza. Hopefully that's correct in Spanish. And the caption reads, "Friday motivation, what motivates you?" Clearly it's a bit of beer for this gentleman. And then you see this other gentleman running laps around his backyard and his kids' playground set. And apparently REI challenged their community to participate in the smallest mile challenge. So people were showing pictures and videos for how they did that for a chance to win some gift cards to REI. And then last but certainly not least, they were also giving people inspiration for how they could better maximize their home in the pandemic. And you see an image here of a beautiful backyard with a tent, and the copy reads about having a special movie night at home. So again, trying to make the most of a difficult situation. But as you can see, if you look at each of the three images, without reading the captions, you can get a sense of what the pictures are communicating, or videos, right? Around kind of some of these kind of funny things that are happening in these everyday moments during the pandemic. Ekaterina, would you like to add anything before we move on?
Well, and that is a good transition to our next tip, which is, adjusting your story and the visuals and your narrative to a channel. That's critical. So I know we only have a couple more minutes because we want to leave time for questions. So let me go straight to an example in this particular case, which is KFC, one of our favorite sort of sometimes cheesy examples of marketing that really draws you in. So KFC does an incredible job using different channels to tell its story in a clever and engaging ways. And here's just a few examples. There's a lot more. If you look at the last 10 years of their marketing, they're fascinating. But for example, in the middle, you see a LinkedIn profile for Colonel Harlan Sanders, right? So the founder, not only can you connect with KFC's founder on LinkedIn, but his profile tells his amazing story. You might not have any idea that, what he did, and that the fact that he did a ton of random jobs before founding KFC at age 65. If your founder is not using LinkedIn to tell your story, Jessica and I really, really recommend that you don't miss that great opportunity. Now, when it comes to engaging and sometimes cheesy, on the left, you see an example of what KFC did for Mother's Day. Mother's Day happens to be their best-selling day of the year. Best-selling day. And so to give mom something extra juicy on Mother's Day, the company released a book, or ebook rather, that's called Tender Winds of Desire. So it's a free 96-page romance novella starring their founder, Colonel Sanders. And moms really, really love it. Some thought it was a little corny, but at the end of the day, it is an interesting sort of way to engage an audience that that likes, romance novels. Why not? So that was a lot of fun. But on the right, here's another example. KFC came up with what they call extra crispy sunscreen. That is, and we're not kidding you, smells like chicken. Okay. I mean, KFC used this limited time sunscreen as a free giveaway and a storytelling opportunity when they launched its extra crispy bucket of sunscreen. So these are examples of digital, online, and offline things they do. They do fun things with print still. That's quite fascinating. But that leads us to the experiential part of it. So Jess, why don't you tell us your example?
So we'll wrap this up here and make sure you have those questions ready. So our fifth and final tip is that great storytellers put the customer experience first. All of the great efforts that you do in storytelling do not mean anything if you do not have a great customer experience. And we have another example of an athletic apparel and kind of camping company. This actually also is an REI example. So we talked about REI earlier in the presentation, but they actually had a real life customer experience where they have this customer service policy where if you buy a pair of shoes that are a size too small or like the equipment is defective, they will try their best to replace the items while you're on your outdoor adventure. And a real customer was completing a huge hike around the Pacific Crest Scenic Trail, which I think might run through Ekaterina's home state of Oregon, actually.
Yes, yes.
And she actually bought her hiking boots, one size too small, complained to the company, said, "What do I do?" And they said, "We will get the boots delivered to the next meeting post on your trail." And the customer could not believe what great customer service this was. And at the time, this customer was nobody. It was an average person, not a celebrity, not famous, not an influencer on social media. But what happened is this woman would later go to write a memoir about her hike, which is called Wild, and it would become a Hollywood movie and a best-selling book that stars Reese Witherspoon. And they included this story in the movie and the book. So this is a crazy example, right? One in a million. But the whole point is that the best marketing does not feel like marketing. And if you really dedicate your business to providing exemplary customer service and great customer experiences across all of the different ways that you touch the customer, these are where the best stories are going to come from. And that's what we want to leave you with today. We want to inspire you to really look for those kind of one in a million moments as you're kind of doing your storytelling strategy and really embrace this as a way to be better as a business. Anything else you'd like to add, Ekaterina, before we wrap up?
Great wrap up, Jessica. I'd love to hear if anybody has questions for us. Hans, Eric, anything from Q&A perspective?
Yeah, we have some questions. Marcela Rocha, she tells us, I saw this title is for Salesforce. But who else do you recommend to read? I think it's the image that you mentioned, several books.
Our first book is the Power Visual Storytelling is ours as well. But there is a number of great books out there on content strategy specifically. So if you want to narrow down content strategy, I suggest you look for some of those books like John Polizzi, Content Inc. is a good book and good starting point with content. There are a number of books that cover the bases and best practices of different social channels. we recommend looking at those because they give you the tips and the tools and examples of what you can do and how to use it to the best of your ability. So I also recommend you look at content around paid media, because organic is really important. But if you do have a budget for paid media, it's really critical to marry the organic and paid. So the whole poem, paid, owned, earned media, right? So the whole approach. So look at combine those strategies. Just any other recommendations?
No, I think you listed some of my favorites. I would just say that, you know, Ekaterina has a great column in Forbes. She's written some wonderful articles over the years. And, you know, I also on my personal blog do, you know, almost weekly have some new articles up there. So if you're looking for ongoing inspiration, I've written a lot of articles on content marketing over the years, so which probably should be the next book, but let's see. But yeah, you can certainly go down a long hole in my blog and find a lot of content marketing inspiration.
Yeah, Jessica does a great job with bringing up latest and most interesting examples too. So if you want to draw from that.
Excellent. We have another question from Beatriz Vallejo. And she asked, what comes first, brand or company storytelling? What about building an institutional storytelling? Example, P&G, Coke, Nestle, etc.
Jess, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I'd be curious to get your take on it, Ekaterina, but my gut says that I think the brand comes first, but then the stories come from the brand. Because, you know, I've worked a lot with startups over the past few years, and there's so much work when you're founding a company around who you want to be as a brand, you know, what your brand stands for, even what colors you use for your logo and your color palette. Those actually reveal things about who you are as a brand. Like there's a reason why Ekaterina and I use red in our books, because that's very bold, it's cheerful, you know, it makes a mark, and we want to have that impact and that wow. So, you know, there's so much that goes into brand building. I think you have to start there, and then the stories will follow. Because if you think about it in the reverse, if you just started making up stories, but your brand wasn't true to those stories, it wouldn't be a good customer experience. So it has to be true to the brand to be a good story.
I agree, Jessica. One of the laws we talk about is consistency law. It doesn't mean everything has to be the same, look the same, sound the same, but there needs to be consistency of spirit and consistency of a broader brand umbrella. And then within that, you can play with a lot of snackable micro content and put others as heroes of those stories, but they all need to support the overarching brand message and brand mission.
Perfect. I just want to mention that the editor who developed the Spanish edition is here, Guillermo Dominguez. He made an excellent job in this translation. And we have a question from Guillermo Dominguez.
Wow, all right, let's hear it.
It's a very, very important question. What? When I read the book, it's in the Spanish edition, there is a chapter that made me ask a question. Where do we find the storytellers? How can we be a perfect storyteller for a brand? Postdata, I was fortunate to be your editor in the Spanish edition.
Very, very good question. That's what a lot of people struggle with. And our, I think, first go-to answer, right, just is look at home first. A lot of people tend to want to go for flashy, you know, sexy channels, something that is extraordinary. And everybody has this desire to go viral immediately, which doesn't always happen, very rarely. But they forget to look at home first. They are, you know, behind the scenes. how the product is made, why their employees excited to work for a brand, why their employees are so knowledgeable in what and how they do things. Look at the partners that you work with, and look at the customers. Some of the most interesting, creative ways that customers use your product is not known out there until you start asking questions. So look at other heroes, your volunteers, if you're a nonprofit. Look at the heroes of your brand and tell those everyday stories. And don't make a mistake on saying the story has to have all the sizzle. It has to be amazing for us to be able to spend time and tell it. Some of the most simple human stories do extremely well because they relate to who I am and what I do, where I live, what matters to me. Some of the simplest little things are sometimes the most important to your customers and to your prospect.
Yes, I agree with Ekaterina wholeheartedly. I think, especially when I was at Dunkin', I was essentially like the storyteller for the business, right? And they had me in that role because I naturally think like a journalist. I fell into that role because I was launching a very successful red blog about Boston called The Savvy Bostonian, and companies said, well, hey, can you build us a corporate blog? So I started to do this for every company that I worked for. But what I would say is, even though I'm someone who thinks like a journalist, I still need to hunt down the stories and other storytellers. So that goes exactly back to what Ekaterina just said, where I think you need to anchor it with a person or a few people, maybe under the marketing or public relations, maybe human resources department, people who have access to a lot of people in the organization, but you have to also think outside of those departments. And essentially, the best way to do this, especially in big organizations, is you just have to knock on a lot of doors, to have like informative Zoom calls or coffee meetings, and really start to find out who are the people that are going to have stories. And it takes a bit of time, but once you unlock who those people are in your company, have like a monthly catch up with them and keep, there's a lot of times where you have to coach and educate these people on what makes a great story. And the more you empower them, watch out. It's like beautiful things happen. And I saw this firsthand over 5 years at Dunkin'. Like people were proactively emailing me, you don't actually need the meetings after a certain amount of time because they just send the stories to you. So, if you're willing to invest a little bit of time, you can have great rewards.
Well, it's the same with customer advocacy. The companies need to listen. A lot of companies even now don't listen on social. They don't go to Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn. They get tagged in a lot of great customer content, but they don't do anything with it. So you have to have a listening element in place in addition to your internal network as well.
We have another question from Sandra Kessler. How long is the recommendation to spend on these stories that you recommend doing?
Great question, Sandra. Man, there's so many variables that go into it, don't they, Jess?
Yeah, I mean, I would always say, I think it's a bigger question, right? Because it really comes down to, what are your goals as a company? And when you start to kind of work from there, it's like anything else you spend time in your job, you have to prioritize. So, that's something where I would probably work with my manager closely and say, okay, if we're trying to raise awareness around this topic, or we're trying to kind of educate customers more, or we want to tell better stories around our products to drive sales, that's when you have to get that prioritization check and say, out of all my other tasks I have to do, how much should I be prioritizing this? And I would always want to tell you, spend a lot of time on storytelling and enjoy the creative process. And that's my happy place, but that's not always the reality of each company's culture. So what I would say is, when you think about your overall content marketing strategy, I think a good portion of it should be storytelling focused. And some of it needs to be a bit more going for the sale, going for the lead gen. So maybe that's a good way to start with your manager, figuring out, okay, when we look at our different content buckets, how do we allocate a percentage to this? And then you can work from there around the workload with it.
And Sandra, people say that, oh, my manager doesn't see it this way. And if you're in that situation, here's what I would say. Spend a bit of your time and try things out. Create a story, create a visual, put it out there, see how it does. Use data to come back to your manager and say, look, this particular piece of organic content with this story, mine, customers, whoever's story, did much better than the product brochure that we developed. There is a place for all of it, obviously. But the way I used to do it when social just started and I couldn't get all of the executives on board is test it out, pilot little things, get a little bit budget or do it myself and show them the data, show them the impact it's having, because you will see immediately people will respond to a story versus a product information. It's just how it is.
We have the last question because the time is over. Carla Morales, she asked, which stage of the brand life cycle is a recommendation to use storytelling?
Every
stage. I mean, even the minute you found a company, if you're a startup, start telling the story as to why you launched the startup.
Yeah,
any time is a great time to start.
Why? What are you doing? Why is your product is interesting, important? How is it being used? Just every single stage has a place for storytelling.
Perfect. Well, this is the final of this webinar. It was a remarkable presentation. I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Hans, and thanks for everybody who came on and asked questions and engaged with us. We'll love that.
Yes, such a great audience. Thank you all so much for joining, and definitely stay in touch after. Let us know how you're doing on your storytelling journey.
Perfect. Thank you for your participation. Bye-bye.
Bye.